guys, it's Ashley and welcome to another Sparky Loves Books video. Thank you for watching. Today I'm going to be doing a book review on the book A Tragic Kind of Wonderful by Lindstrom. I was given an electronic version of this book through NetGalley in exchange for an honest review, and all of the opinions in this video are my own. This is going to be a spoiler-free video, so feel free to watch if you haven't read it. It's an advanced copy of it. The book doesn't actually come out until February 7th of 2017, so that's why I wanted to do a spoiler-free version of it so that you guys can read it when it does come out. I've also done a full review on GOODREADS, which does have spoilers, and I will leave a link to that review in the description box below. So this book tells the story of Mel Hannigan, who is a 17-year-old in high school. She has bipolar disorder, and a year prior to the start of this book, some events happened. She lost some of her friends to some drama, and they no longer are her friends. She had a core group of 3 best friends and herself, and something happened and they no longer talk to her anymore, so she's really isolated, and whatever happened the year prior set off her sort of spiral and ended up making her hospitalized, and she was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder after the events that happened a year ago. When the book opens, she does have 2 other new friends who she kind of keeps at a distance. She doesn't quite get as intimate with those friends as she would if they were, say, best friends or something like that. They don't know that Mel has bipolar disorder, and in fact, the only people who do know are very specific members of her family. The other thing we do know at the opening of this book is that something has happened to her older brother. He passed away previously, I think about 3 or 4 years prior to when this book takes place. It was really sad to see her trying to cope with the loss even quite a few years afterwards. The family dynamic after having gone through a loss like that was a really interesting part of this book, and overall the plot of this book is really interesting, you know, getting into Mel's interior like monologues and stuff, and getting to know her and who she is, and seeing how she processes both big events and day-to-day events. The plot of this revolving around her relationship or lack of relationship with her friends was really interesting. The plot about how her family is coping with the loss of her brother was also really interesting, and learning about Mel herself was interesting as well. So all in all, I would say for the plot, this was a really great plot. It was well done, and it was really interesting, and I'm glad that a book like this with this plot exists, because it really focuses on the inner workings of an individual with bipolar disorder, especially a teen with bipolar disorder. This was really akin to All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, which was also really interesting to see a young person who has been officially diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I have a very close member of my family who has been diagnosed with this disorder, and so I'm always really interested in reading about mental illnesses, and especially ones that don't just glance over the fact that they have a mental illness, but like the book is about that illness. I think that those books are really important and really interesting. One of the biggest things I didn't like about this book was the pacing of it. I didn't really find that it found its footing, or nothing really happened until halfway through the book, which is fine on the one hand because you spend the first half of the book getting really, you know, like I said, in depth into Mel and in her family dynamic. She lives with her mom and her Aunt Joan, who she calls Hurricane Joan, and so you really get to know what her life is like. You know, the author has really sort of built up, you know, here's what her home life is like, here's what her school life is like, here's what her work life is like. So you really get to know how Mel has made her life day by day after, you know, the events of her friends and the events of her brother's death. So I understand why he took so long to make you very, very aware of what Mel is comfortable with and what she's not, especially because we're talking about a mental illness. So knowing that person's comfort levels and what they are and are not, you know, able to handle is really important, but it still made it a struggle to like get through because there wasn't much happening. And a lot of times some of the things that would go through Mel's head were very repetitive, and I know that this is probably because Mel herself like had a very repetitive mind. I know that with my family member, a lot of times they'll have the same sort of feelings over and over again, and it's really hard for them to express them, so they just kind of say the same sort of emotion that they're feeling over and over again, and they tend to kind of cling to events a lot without being able to let them go. So I know that because she struggles with letting things go and because she tends to hold on to thoughts and emotions, that's probably why her thought process was really repetitive, but it still made the first half of this book really, like I said, really tough to get through. So in the blurb of this book, it sort of hints that there's going to be a romance in this book, that she's going to have to try and either cover her mental illness so that this boy, whose name is David, thinks that she's normal, or she's going to have to out and out tell him and then deal with the consequences of him not liking her because of her mental illness. And the blurb about the book made it seem like that romance was going to be a really important part of the book and like the focal point of the book. I was really kind of worried about this because that's not what I wanted to read about. I didn't want to read another mind-numbingly unoriginal story like that where this girl like meets the boy and sees the light and things start clicking for her. I didn't want that, so I was hesitant going into this. It wasn't the focal point though, and that was so nice. It was a very understated romance. We were brought back to this sort of like kindling relationship just sporadically, but it is not the focal point. In fact, sometimes it's just like forgotten about, and then whenever David happens to be there, that's when it's brought up again, and it's really nice to have it be so understated. There was a really interesting part of this book where Mel is visiting her therapist, and her therapist helps her to come to a realization about herself and her identity that is really cool. I did not see it coming. I think it is really important and very well done, and I am so happy that this epiphany of an identity happened. It's just awesome. I'm so happy for Mel, and I'm so happy for this book for that having happened. I really liked how friendships were the focus of the novel and how we were really getting an in-depth look in how Mel does and does not deal with friendships, and how the very nuanced, subtle, sometimes even trivial things can really make her anxious, and she doesn't really know how to cope with the nuances of a friendship, and how she's always sort of dreading a falling out with friends, and then even, I mean, pre-friendships and post-friendships, she has this dread about the friendships. And so I thought that was really interesting because it really made me like want to just give her a hug and sympathize with her a lot. So it made me just love her even more, having her be this really weary person who was actually a very kind-hearted individual but didn't know how to reach out to people and how to fully be comfortable with friendships, honestly. I really loved getting inside Mel's brain. I've said this multiple times already, but there's a very specific part at the end of the book where she kind of starts rambling, and the book's writing itself really reflects this because there's a lack of punctuation at this point in the book. There are rambling sentences, really long paragraphs, and so the writing itself is a reflection of the racing, rambling mind that Mel has, and it really felt like I was reading the way she was actually thinking, and that was one of the coolest parts of this book, was that like chunk of the book where she's cycling really rapidly and just like cannot control her thoughts. She cannot string thoughts together, they just go, and it was so cool to read, and I really wish that that happened more often in the books I read. So if you guys know of any books like that where the mental illness is portrayed that way in the writing itself, please let me know. Leave me a recommendation in the comments below. I would love to read it. I really liked her Aunt Joan, or Hurricane Joan, or HJ. She has a lot of nicknames. I really liked her because she was really likable and clearly loved her family, loved Mel, and her heart was in the right place, but she was so flawed. She was very narcissistic and was a poor judge of character and just had bad judgment calls in general. And she was also really immature, and so I really liked having her be flawed. And she also has bipolar disorder, so I like that she wasn't like Mel. You know, you have Mel and then you have HJ. Both have bipolar disorder, but they don't express it the same ways, they don't show it the same ways, they don't have the same thought process. And I feel like that is a really important sort of thing to get out of this book, is to show that yes, both these people have bipolar disorder, just like in the real world, many people have bipolar disorder. That doesn't mean that they're all the same. You can't lump them all together and just say, oh, that means they're crazy, or oh, that means they're depressed. Like, no, that's not what it means. They're still an individual person. They just have this disorder. And I feel like that's a really important message to get across to people, so I'm so happy it's there. The only other thing I felt lacking was the book's depiction of bipolar disorder. For some reason, and I don't have bipolar disorder, so I just might not know if this is accurate or not. I don't know. Maybe it's because the person I know in my life who's diagnosed with bipolar disorder was diagnosed at a much, much later age than Mel was. So maybe because of that, and because Mel is a differently developed person, that's why it sort of manifests differently. And I just got done saying that every person is different who has bipolar disorder, and to not like lump them all together. So I feel like maybe it wasn't that it was lacking in its depiction of bipolar disorder, it just wasn't what I was expecting of it. So I'm gonna have to ask this family member to read it and just make sure that I'm not like being unintentionally rude towards people with mental illnesses. It just really felt like it didn't quite capture it right. From what I understand secondhand from what my family member goes through, it just doesn't seem quite to get it. I will say that the talk of mixed states that happens throughout this book is really great, because my family member goes through mixed states a lot. And most people don't even know what a mixed state is, but it is not a great place to be in. It is a really scary place for the person and the people around that person to be in. And I'm so, like, in awe of the fact that the mixed state was so prevalent in this book. I really liked this tone of this book. The heart and the no holding back approach of this book was fantastic to read about. I'm so happy that it wasn't fluffy or it didn't go into detail. It did go into detail, and it was not afraid to do so, so I was really big fan of that. My favorite moments were every single time that Mel was working in that senior center. I loved the characters in the senior center. Her doctor, David's mom, what's his name, Mr. Terrence Smith, I think was his name, the piano player. I loved all those characters. I loved who Mel was when she was there. It really like showed her kind heart and her funny sense of humor and her strength, and I just loved who she was when she was there. I felt like she was in her element, and it made me happy for her every time she was there, because she was loved and she was getting something out of going there, and the people who lived there and worked there were getting something out of her. So there was this nice reciprocation, and you could sort of tell that she knew she was needed and that she had a reason like to get up in the morning and to feel like she had a purpose. And so I was really happy for her in all of those moments when she was in the senior center working and just being in her element and being so awesome and wonderful. Like I said, I thought this was a great idea for a story. I really enjoyed the story of self-discovery, and I feel like I've read a lot of self-discovery books, but this was made much more of an original journey because, like I said, it dives so deep and so often into Mel's brain, and so it made it more of a refreshing self-discovery journey to have it be about this teenager with bipolar disorder and her struggles. So I really enjoyed reading about Mel and reading about this crisis that she was going through in this particular time in her life. So I really felt like I knew Mel inside and out, and I really just liked her character and liked, you know, everything she was about, and I really liked the depictions of mental illness. I did think it was one of the better depictions of mental illness that I've read, at least, and I'm glad that it exists, honestly. It just somehow felt a little bit lacking, like I said, and that first half of that book was really tough to read. I actually started this review thinking I was going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I think I'm going to push it to 4. I reserve the right to change that, but I'm thinking 4 stars out of 5 for this book, and I really highly recommend it. So let me know in the comments below if you've already read this book, or if you want to know any more about this book. If you're interested in it, leave me a comment. I'd be happy to chat with you about it, and feel free to like this video if you liked it, or give me any recommendations on how to maybe better improve my review videos, because this is only the 3rd one I've done like this, so feel free to leave me any feedback, and I will see you guys next time with a new video. Bye!